Welcome to Releasing Your Inner Dragon, where story creators talk story creation. Drake is an award-winning fantasy novelist and creative writing teacher. You can find his epic fantasy series, The Genesis Oblivion, on Kindle Vella. Marie runs a fantasy world-building channel called Just in Time Worlds, and her first book, The Hidden Blade, is available on Kindle Unlimited. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello and welcome once again to Releasing Your Inner Dragon with Drake and Marie. Today we're going to be talking about a couple different things. We're going to do another trope dive where we're going to look at a trope and we're going to let that kind of lead into the main topic. So we're going to talk about the chosen one trope, and then we're going to let that kind of bleed into kind of what we're calling how to balance narrating characters within a story. So we're talking about actual word count and, what they can actually do. Before we start, as always, please click subscribe, share this with your writing friends. I know you have somebody who writes also that you would probably get something out of this podcast. You should not be a jerk. You should actually show them this and share them with it so that they can also benefit from the discussions that we're having.
Sharing is caring.
Sharing is caring. All right, well, let's just dive right in because this is going to be an interesting one. How do you feel about the chosen one trope? Do you use it? Do you not use it?
I have a real fondness for the chosen one trope.
And this is going to be a good topic then, because I despise the chosen one trope.
And yet Robert Jordan's your favorite author.
No. I'm my favorite author. Brandon Sanderson is my second favorite author. Joel Rosenberg is probably my third favorite author. And then, probably Robert Jordan.
Because, if you wanted to, chosen ones, that man went for it. He dove in with both feet all the way.
And this big realm project that I'm working on kind of sort of has a chosen one, or at least we make you think that we're going down that. That's all I'm going to say, because everything is kind of a mind twist. Every single trope that we're using in there, I have tried to figure out how to use it in a way that is really going to catch everybody off guard. So I'm excited about that.
I do have a love for the chosen one trope. I think it's a love born from having read that style of fantasy first. And when, people are kind of almost like they almost imprint on the fantasy they read in their youth. So if you read the kind of chosen one kind of fantasy in your youth and you kind of imprinted on it, you're like, yes, give me more of that, because it brings back like happy childhood memories of being able to read all day as opposed to, having to work to pay the bills. So I think in part it is that. There are, I feel, pitfalls with the chosen one. But first, I'll talk about what, in my opinion, the chosen one gives you. It gives you a driving force. There is an external force that kind of shoves the hero along into the adventure. So regardless of how reluctant they are or how passive they are as a person or anything like that, the fate itself will keep throwing them into like this course, and then the struggle is them overcoming the issues that they've brought on themselves by trying to avoid that fate.
And that's probably the reason why I don't like it, because I am such a proponent of the individual freedom of people. So when we talk about choice versus fate, I'm very much opposed to fate, because I don't want to believe that I live in a world where everything I'm going to do in the future has already been decided. Everything's done. And, you brought up Robert Jordan. One of the things that I think he actually did really, really well was he had his prophecies, sure. And then they were widely known. The whole world knew that these prophecies existed. People were looking for the Dragon Reborn. People knew about the tale, blah, blah, blah. And it was very well documented. And I think the thing that he did so well was the world knew that the prophecy is A, B, and C. And yet when Rand starts actually going through it, he's like, oh, actually it's X, Q, and T. And so it was it allowed him, especially when he pulls out of Rand's POV toward the latter part of the series, where Rand is just doing all these things that you have already learned this prophecy, and you're kind of with the rest of the world. You're with the other characters. They're going, oh my God, Rand has literally lost his mind. He's gone crazy, which ties into the whole, if men use magic, they go crazy. And so I think he really did about as good of a job as you can do, in my mind, for having that, because Rand still had to figure out that A, everyone's interpretation of this was wrong, and B, he was on his own in trying to figure out these. He knew he was the Dragon Reborn, and I think the reason why that works so well is because it's not decided that he's going to win. Because if he makes one misstep, if he translates the prophecy wrong, then he fails. And so there's still this huge, sure, I'm the chosen one, and if the prophecy happens, I will win, but that's a big if.
So before I move on to why that is one of the big pitfalls of using the chosen one trope, I just want to say that you can have a chosen one without necessarily adopting a prophecy as well, right? You can have a chosen one be like the chosen champion of a god. So a good example of this actually comes from the Kashil series, where the gods choose Phaedra and they throw her into situations. Like in the third book, how does she put it? She says, the darkness that would consume the world for 1,000 years was being born in the east. And against this force, the gods of Terra Da'an sent a courtesan, a 10-year-old boy, and a swordsman. And there was no prophecy involved there. It was just that she was the chosen one of the gods in this conflict. So you don't have to have a prophecy necessarily attached to a chosen one, just to, put that out there.
That is true.
If you do have a prophecy is a thing you need to be careful with. You cannot just lay out the plot in prophecy, then it's boring. Prophecy cannot predict who's going to win, because then you're going to end up with where's the conflict.
Right.
So prophecy is one of the biggest pitfalls with the chosen one, and it's the one where personally I see the people go wrong the most when they use the chosen one trope, is they make the prophecy too obvious. They use prophecy firstly, which is fine. I use prophecy too, but don't make it obvious. Speak in obscure languages, speak in metaphor. Don't have people just interpret it too easily. Like, it needs to be a hunt to try and unravel this prophecy once the hero has accepted that they're going to follow the prophecy, which, is not a guarantee that they're going to do straight off the bat. Like, if you were, let's say you, Drake, find this prophecy that says you, Drake, are fated to save the world by doing X, Y, Z. I can imagine you kicking and screaming against that like a maniac and being like, no, I won't. I'll find another way. I will not do this. Somebody else do it, like whatever, And that is also a source of conflict. It's actually a fun source of conflict in the chosen
the reluctant hero is always, and one probably used more than anything else.
Yes.
Because it is the one factor that makes the character humanizing to the reader, where they're like, wait a minute, I got to go on this huge, dangerous thing that I'm probably going to end up dying with, and no one is even going to care that that it's me doing it. Why would I ever do this?
Yeah.
And so, the reluctant hero is always there. But then actually, one of the things that I think a lot of people miss about the chosen one, and yes, let's separate it from prophecy and just talk about the chosen one, because technically every story is written about a chosen one, because the author has chosen that one or those, whatever. So technically you have that. And so another way to look at it is the difference between a selfish character and a selfless character. And both are chosen, but the difference is that a selfless character doesn't necessarily want to do this. They're not doing it for their own means. They're not doing it for the ends, which means they're the hero. And a selfish chosen one is going to make choices that are going to benefit themselves above all else, which makes them the villain. And so that's a really kind of easy way to parcel those two out and to kind of look at them in that light. And I think a lot of people miss that with their villains. They don't allow their villains to be completely narcissistic. And I think that's a vital trait of somebody, even somebody who, because you look at people that feel like they're doing just things, but you look at it and it's morally reprehensible what they're doing. But if they're doing it for their own selfish reasons, so like Anakin Skywalker, we both agree that Anakin is irredeemable once he slaughters children. He thinks he's doing a good thing. In his mind, he is morally just for murdering children. The rest of the world sees that as an atrocity. But the biggest reason why he has that cognitive dissonance is because it also benefits him. He personally gets power that others don't have, and he is driven by getting that power. So just another thing to think about of the chosen one, and especially if it is not attached to prophecy, it's a kind of easy way to think about the dichotomy difference between your hero and your villain.
And I think that the other thing that people often kind of miss with the chosen one is it is entirely possible to subvert that trope enormously. You can have this prophetic hero, perfect in every way, except he accidentally gets stabbed. Oops, dead. And now you need a new one because the job still has to be done. But now this kid who's been nurtured to fill this role is dead. Okay, so then you have what is sometimes called the unchosen trope, where it's like some random dude picked out of the bushes gone, oh, here. And actually they did that quite well in Once Upon a Time, where there were two twins, Prince Charming, and the first one is brought up, by a king and so on, and the other one's brought up by a shepherd, because of course, that's another trope, right? This is the twin brothers. And then they have to go, the prince one has to go slay a dragon. But he gets stabbed before he even goes on the quest to go on the dragon. He's just lying there dead, right? So his father then calls up Rumpelstiltskin, and Rumpelstiltskin says, yeah, I can give you a hand. He's got a twin brother. And there's the shepherd boy who gets like a, sword thrust into his hand and told to go kill a dragon, which was hysterical.
So I don't know if the world will ever see it, but I've talked about the cartoon that I've written, Fiend Folly. The cartoon is about a group of monsters who accidentally become heroes. But there is a character in there that I've never really talked about, because I haven't talked about much of the details of it, other than the fact that I've written 8 seasons of this cartoon, that he is the chosen, or at least he claims to be the chosen one. And so he's constantly showing up. He's just a reoccurring character who's always showing up to do the deed to save the world or whatever. And it always ends up terrible for him. In the first season, he loses a hand. In the second season, he loses a leg. In the third season, he loses an eye. Like, he's just constantly losing body parts as he goes through, but he constantly continues thinking that he's the one that the world is chosen to save everyone. It is kind of the same thing, although in that one, it's all just him declaring that he's the chosen one and not actually any forces behind that character's kind of skewed vision of the world. And he is hilarious. It is a really fun character to write.
And that's also why the chosen one is so great, because you can subvert it in so many hysterical ways. I am the chosen one, except, oops, you're not. As I said, the biggest pitfall for me is the prophecy angle of the chosen one. But I think the other problem with the chosen one is that if you have a chosen one, a singular chosen one, there is a temptation to give that character the lion's share of the story. And if you have multiple POVs that you're writing from, you can end up in a situation where actually the other POVs aren't real POVs. They have like 1 or 2 chapters that don't have a real part of the story, and their story actually isn't told at all. And that, I think, dovetails very nicely into what we want to discuss in today's main part of the podcast, which is equity for characters. All POVs matter.
Or they shouldn't be POVs.
Or they shouldn't be POVs. If they don't matter, they shouldn't be POVs.
I've said it a million times. Don't switch into a character's head for one chapter because you just want to give some extra piece of information. The only person that character matters to is you, the writer. No readers give a crap about that character. You know, you're wasting word count. It's the same thing with head hopping. You really, there's no POV that allows for head hopping, which means getting into the head of every single character. But I understand why writers do it. Writers, you know, immature writers. And when I say immature writers, I mean young, starting off writers, whatever. Immature writers do it because they think, oh, but look at all this extra information I'm giving to the reader. You know, all of these characters, I love every single one of them. And I'm able to give all of this. Yeah, no, it's overload. Nobody cares. The whole point is to give them, and it's one of the reasons why, like with epic fantasy, it only has a select, I mean, it's still a huge group of readers, but it's still a select group because of the fact that you're forcing readers to care about 3, 4, 5, 7 characters and their plight and their story, as opposed to adventure fantasy, which is, you know, could be 5, 6 characters, but they're all just, you know, like we talked about the one-man band trope. It's really just one-man band, or a 5-man band. I'm sorry, the 5-man band trope. It's really just one band made up of 5 characters. But when you get into hardcore POV, you want to spend all that time. You're actually wasting word count that could have been spent connecting the reader deeper to the character that you want them to connect to, the character that the story is centered around, the character who is impacted the most by the story, the character who is going to consume the theme so that the audience consumes it unknowingly. That's the important one, or the important ones in my case, where I write pretty much nothing but multiple POV characters.
That brings up what I think this question was about, because I think it was actually a question somebody asked us at some point. So if you have multiple POVs, they don't necessarily all have to have the exact same word count in every book, okay? But they certainly need to have an equitable feel of amount of story allocated to them.
Probably the only time you'll hear me use the word equitable.
And I'm using equitable in the meaning of the word, as in this is the story that they deserve for their portion of the tale to be told.
Well, every POV character should have an equal outcome, as in every POV character, their story must be as interesting as every other POV's character. You know, I talked about the Robert Jordan Wheel of Time with the Perrin in books 7, 8, 9. Like, I can't, my OCD won't allow me to skip chapters, but I really, 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 really wanted to skip chapters. I don't ding Sanderson very much because he is a phenomenal storyteller, but in the Stormlight Chronicles, he's got these one-off POV characters that are in another part of the world that have nothing to do with anything we're reading, and they're beautifully well written. I just don't care. Like, I'm so invested in this thing right here, and then you shove me over there, and yes, you're giving me the promise. You know, I know it's supposed to be a 10 novel series. You're giving me this promise that it will pay off later, but I don't care. And by the time I get there, I will have forgotten. It's such a small little chunk of information, and there's so much information I have to consume with these other characters that really, by the time I get there, I'm not going to remember it.
That's very much the problem as well with epic fantasy, especially if you have 2 years between books, which I think is what Sanderson at the moment averages with Stormlight. I can't remember much of Way of Kings, right? I have not read the most recent Stormlight archive.
I haven't either.
I've bought it. I've got it, but I haven't read it.
I've got it, and Sanderson signed it.
Nice. But I can't remember what happened in Way of Kings or any of the others for that matter. So I actually have to go back and read everything again. So at this point, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to just sit on this book until I have the whole thing, and then I'll just binge it. Like,
and it's the reason why, again, why I'm so excited about The Realm. You know, I started working on this story in 2019. It's 2022, 4 of us working on it and writing on it. It won't come out. I mean, I had cancer, so that's put us behind. We really were going to come out first or second quarter of 22, but losing so much time to cancer and having to deal with that, I'm not going to pick. I never pick a release date on something like this because life happens. But the biggest reason why I won't pick a release date on it is because when we drop the first book, we are committing to dropping a brand new novel, the next novel, every 3 months, every 90 days for 5 years. The fans should be able to just roll through it and not have that 2-year chunk. But that's why we're doing so much front-loaded writing, because we have to have, because it'll release faster than we can write them, even with 4 of us writing on it. So we've done the math, we know how fast we can write, and we got our quotas and everything like that. So we know how many novels we have to have completely written, edited, and typeset and ready to be published before we can drop the first one and still be able to keep up so that we have finished the series before the last one is scheduled to drop. And, you know, it'll come out when it comes out. I'm hoping, you know, mid to end 23. I don't think it's going to be any later than that. That's the big reason, because it is such a long and big series. And I think it's going to be really exciting to be able to get that new novel every 3 months and just keep that story flowing and flowing and flowing and flowing.
So to get back to just POVs and kind of the importance of balancing them, one of the earliest feedbacks on the beta reads of the Ducal Heir that I got back was that I wasn't giving Naira enough slice of life moments. And I think that this is something that I see it sometimes in critters who are more used to critting adventure style fantasy, or I guess more urban style fantasy, or not epic fantasy anyway, where they say, nothing new seems to be revealed plot-wise in this chapter. And then I say, yes, that's fair. And I move on from it and I leave the chapter in. Because in epic fantasy, you're introducing these characters for the long term. You're introducing this world for the long term. That's kind of what epic fantasy is, right? And you need to give those characters slice of life moments. They shouldn't it shouldn't all be boring chapters. There must still be conflict in the scene, absolutely. But
well, I want to correct, unless I just misheard you, because what I heard was that they dinged you on that they wanted more slice of life. That's the way I kind of interpreted it.
So that is what my beta reader said.
Right.
Sometimes there are critters who read those slice of life moments and they're like, oh, but there's no plot information in here. I'm like, yeah, no, I know. It's okay. I'm gonna move on. It is important to have conflict.
Want to try.
Yes, but it's sometimes it's not about the new plot information. Sometimes it's about the character struggling in the new environment. The character fighting to master a new problem.
But I would challenge that is still plot elements, because they are needing to grow to something new so that they will be able to deal with this new world. So I would say that you're still throwing in plot elements, because you have to try. And so I always start all of my stories, and I told the story about Patrick LeBruto not liking the way I did this, and yet when I redid it, he was like, you're right, this doesn't work. I like starting my opening chapters almost always, and I think next podcast we're actually going to go through a lot of opening chapters. I'm going to take the 5 opening chapters of the Genesis saga, and we're going to kind of look at them. I like starting my characters in a very mundane, that the world has not blown up on them. This is what they do for a living. It's just rote. They have a job, they have family, they have life. And I think that is so vitally important, because I'm building where this character's mindset comes from and what they were before the world encroaches on them and forces them down a path that they weren't wanting to go down or weren't expecting to go down. And so I have been pinged on that. I mean, like I said, Patrick LeBruto, one of the best acquisition editors in the business for 40 years, pinged me on it. He still relented because he was like, yeah, this isn't as good. You are right. And so that whole industry standard of, oh, you have to start this in a fight. You have to start this.
Or that you can't take the time to give the character a few slice of life chapters. And one of the things that my beta reader specifically said was that I don't feel as though I know her before she hits the action. And she's a very complicated character.
Mm-hmm. That character of yours had to be expanded.
Yes.
She's amazing. And if you don't understand that, if you don't understand the culture and the religion and everything else, you do miss a lot. So I 100% agree with your beta readers on that.
I did go back and I put in chunks of extra chapter and kind of like travel and so on. Travel. You see, like I try to avoid the walking, but sometimes you need the walking. You need it.
So my crutch is meals. I don't do a lot of walking, but when I need to have that moment, there's usually a meal scene where they would just talk and eat. And, you know, it's a ton of information that the reader needs. It's a ton of world building and character building and everything else. But I don't know. That's my meals are Tolkien's walking through the woods. Although I think mine are a little more exciting than his, but that's just, I might be biased on that.
I think that it's very important to in every POV, in terms of their equity to the story ratio, have they been sufficiently introduced? So, and I'll give you a contrasting example. Naira, on the one hand, had to be introduced in multiple chapters. She needed a strong introduction of her culture, the world she comes from, the religion that she represents. She's a old character. She's 200 odd years old. You know, she's lived a long time. She comes from a powerful position. There's a lot about her to unpack. And it's the first time the reader is encountering Naira. Conversely, I have Isabella, a child, as a POV that the reader has met in the first book. So the reader has been aware of Isabella. She's an 8-year-old girl. She doesn't need as much slice of life introduction, because it's easier also for the reader to care, because, you know, everybody instantly goes, oh.
Yeah, I want to add two things. And the second one, I'm actually going to do first. It's what I take advantage of in epic fantasy that I don't think anyone else really can. If you have a single POV, a Conan or a, you know, private detective or whatever, you're it, you know, Dresden, you're it. You've got this one character. The beautiful thing about having multiple different POVs at multiple different stages in their lives, it allows you to actually give information to the reader from different people. So in other words, you know, I open up, like Genesis opens up in a cell with a lion dude who literally has never saw freedom in his life. And so he is as limited as you can possibly be. And the camera never leaves the cell. And then the next one, the reason you get it is because it's now a farm boy. He's basically exactly the same as the lion dude. It's just that he has at least a perceived freedom to an extent. And then the next one, and, you know, is this college age person. And the next one is this jaded 45-year-old, you know, mercenary. And then the last one is this, you know, almost immortal being that doesn't know that she's an immortal being. But anyway, the reason why I roll them out in that very specific order is because it allows me to give 1/5 of what the audience needs in the first one, 1/5 in the second one. So I'm not repeating anything, but if you don't read an earlier chapter from a completely different POV, you're going to miss things in later chapters because I'm going to assume you know it. I've already given you that. I've already given you that piece of information, that world building, that reason for being, that plot device, whatever. So that but that also helps me to make characters more authentic, because the 45-year-old jaded mercenary literally been doing this forever. Nothing is new to him. And so starting a story in the head of a character that nothing is new is not necessarily very exciting. And so by starting it with much more immature, as far as life experience characters, it allows the readers to come in with that same wonder, and then they start actually gaining experience of this new world and this new environment, so that by the time they get to the guy who's been doing it forever, they're kind of much more comfortable with this as well. So that order is not by accident. It's understanding that the reader is reading the whole story as a whole. And so you have to look at it in that vein. You can't look at it as, oh, well, character A is going to need, this piece, this, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Well, character B, they have 1 and 2, but I still got to give them 3, 4, and 5. No, you don't, because the character doesn't need anything. They're fake. They literally don't exist. The only thing that exists is the reader. And so if in character 1, you give them 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, then you do not get to give 3, 4, and 5 in the second character. Now, what I would probably do is give 1, 2, and 3 from the first character and 4 and 5 from the second character. And you still get 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 to the reader without having double dipped and making this boring and so on and so forth. So I spent a lot of time actually thinking about the order of chapters and the order of events and the order of, and not just that, it's also the order of, or not the order of, but it's also who, because sometimes POV characters travel together and you can't write it from both their POVs at the same time. And you definitely don't want to write the scene from one character's perspective and then write the exact same scene going back in time from the other characters. I mean, there's a few times that you can get away with it. I know you did it once. I've done it once. There's a couple kind of things that the author, but even still, you're always going to make the readers have some type of negative. They might like it in some ways, but every reader is going to go, why am I reading the same thing I've already read? You cannot avoid that pitfall when you double dip on a scene, on an event. You just can't get away from it. And it's frustrating as a writer because you're like, but you're getting completely different information. And I say, no, I've already been down this path. Why am I doing it again?
Exactly.
You just can't get away from that.
I think that one of the things that you said now about the revelation and the order of thing actually dovetails into something that I've started doing specifically now that I'm writing the third book, because I edit one and write one. Mm-hmm. And so I'm editing the Ducal Heir, finishing it and launching it while writing the Bloodgate. And what I found I had to do in order to make sure that I was not just keeping the POVs equitable, but that I was keeping the storylines equitable, because by the time I've hit the Bloodgate, I've gone from having kind of one major storyline to having 4. And I had to list each scene, which of these storylines it predominantly deals with, so that I have an idea of like word count and scene count per storyline, so that I know like where I'm skimping and whether I should potentially cut that storyline. Because if I'm only spending 10,000 words on a storyline in a 180,000 word book, is it that important? Like, is that story important? And I think you need to ask yourself the same thing about a POV. If you're spending less than an equitable amount of time on a POV, is it worth keeping?
And that brings up a very interesting thing that I thought that I would never do, because I don't like using math formulas for anything that I do. I try to be very organic. I don't like, we already talked about it. I don't like fake versus free will. But with the realm, because there are 4 writers writing, and each one of us need to write exactly 25% to earn our paycheck. And there are 8 POV characters, and we've decided that I'm writing 2 of them, and no one else will write those 2 POVs. And Rob's writing 2 of them, and no one else will write those POVs. Now, those POVs can be secondary characters in someone else's story, and that's fine. And that happens often. But they can't be the narrating character unless that writer is writing it. So I literally had to go, okay, so each character must get 15, 25-ish thousand word chunks of their story. And so I got this murder board that has 8 rows, and there's yarn that connects different things to different things, but each one of them has 15 post-it notes of this is the first 25,000 word ish of their journey, and this is the second, and each one of those have to have kind of a satisfying end to them.
So I don't want to say that all of this comes down to math, but at the same time, I found it useful to actually check my word count on various chapters and POVs and storylines and go like, oh my, I've actually like way overwritten on this character, and this character is getting no love, and this storyline is being neglected. Okay, either I need to cut or I need to fix this.
See, and
So
I've never done that.
it actually did help my thought process.
Yeah, because like in Genesis Saga, in Act 1, no one even notices this. That's one of the frustrating things about being a clever writer, is sometimes no one even sees that you're being clever. And I didn't think this was that clever. In Act 1, I call it A Day in the Life. And the first chapter opens up with the sun just coming up in character A. And same in chapter 2, the sun is now just a little bit over the horizon. It's up. And literally, if you pay attention to the time of even though you're following 5 different characters, it's threaded through, but 2 of those characters only get 1 chapter each. So the 20-ish college student guy gets 1 chapter kind of in the middle about what's going on in his life, because there wasn't enough. I didn't want to come up with story that just doesn't matter. So this matters in introducing him. So I'm going to write this 1 chapter. And same thing with the kind of, chick, the crazy killing machine chick. She's the last chapter because her story takes place at about 2 o'clock in the morning of that night. So, but no one's ever noticed that. No one's ever gone, oh, wow, the day in the life is literally one day, 24-hour period in 5 characters' lives that are in 5 completely different parts of the world. That's really clever of you, but no one has ever said that. The other thing you have to, and the reason why I went down this is the other thing you have to kind of think about is time. Like in that first novel takes place over a couple months, and yet 65,000 words of it takes place in 24 hours, the first 24 hours. And then the rest kind of times slows down a little bit, and because you have travel and you have adventure and you have all this other stuff. One guy takes a 2.5 week trip across the ocean, and yes, things happen while he's on that boat, but I have to then now think about, okay, where is everybody else's story time wise? So if he's here on this boat and he's a week in, that means everybody else needs to be around a week-ish. I do definitely magic wand some of it, but the readers never notice that because you just feel like it feels very chronological.
I did that as well. Like I mapped my timeline out quite extensively because you have to be careful with that as well. Like sometimes you need to give a character like double chapters or a big chapter or chunky chapter because a lot's happening to them in this time period, and then nothing's going to happen. And, it's everybody else does their things, and then, you come together again. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with doing like that. No, there is no rule that says every chapter has to alternate. Absolutely no rule. But the overall book needs to feel like the characters all shared equally in the story. The POV characters all had an equitable share of the story.
Right. And to me, it's not word count. It's more of they had to have an equal impact on the reader, an equal impact of what they accomplished, what they struggled against, what they had to fight against. I want to chase one rabbit on something you said, because I get asked this all the time. And it's probably my most annoying question, because it's not a question that ever came to my mind when I was coming up through the ranks. And so it boggles my mind that so many people ask this question. And maybe it's just because, again, going back to my freedom of choice mindset, but I get asked all the time, how long should a chapter be? And to me, that's a crazy question, because the answer is as long as it needs to be. I've got chapters that are 3 paragraphs long, and I've got chapters that are 7,000 words long, because that's all the chapter needed, or the chapter needed that much. So I don't care, for me, and I've gone over the 5, what I deem as the 5 things needed for a scene. You need a setup, a defined conflict of some point, a rise in tension to that conflict, an overcome of that conflict, or some type of resolution. It doesn't have to be a complete resolve. It could be we got a chunk of it and now we know that there's another extended piece or whatever, and then a hook to make the reader want to read the next scene. So if I can accomplish that in 3 paragraphs and the reader is 100% satisfied with that, or I feel they're going to be, I'm good. If I need 7,500 words, then that's what I need. So here's the crazy thing. So the original version, because I'm in a weird position as a writer that I have rewritten something that was already published. The published went out of business. Only the first 2 books were released. I had written the 3rd book, but it never got released. Haven't written the 4th or 5th book yet. Still haven't written the 4th and 5th book. I still will have to do that eventually. But because I learned so much and grew so much as a writer over that period of time, book 3 feels like it's written by a completely different author than book 1. Because I really was. I had, in that first one, I was still learning. I wasn't teaching. I wasn't doing all the stuff that I am now. And so I wasn't completely 100%. I mean, I still worked a day job. I wasn't immersed in this culture of just being a writer. So that's the reason for me going, well, if it's going to have to be republished anyway, I'm going to rewrite it. And, I know it's going to upset my fans because it's been forever since that first book came out, but you're going to get a much better product. So one of the interesting things is, because I am so technically minded, I have the ability to kind of look at this stuff. And my average chapter length when I wrote the original version of Farmers and Mercenaries is about 22 to 2,400 words. And pretty much now there's an entire new character arc in the rewrite that didn't exist in the first book. So there is a ton of new material. But all the rest of the chapters, other than a few little changes that I made, like I made a mistake with one of the characters on a plot device. I was stupid. I shouldn't have done it. So I did it a different way, which is much more logical in the rewrite. But for the most part, 90% of everything that was written in book 1 is written in book 2. I mean, in the rewrite. But the average chapter length is 42 to 4,500 words, double the length. And nothing extra happens in those chapters. But like I like to say, one of my Uber fans that was beta reading it, and I think I've told this story before, so I'll just whip through it, but she had read the opening chapter from the Farm Boy, and she was like, oh my God, I love this Farm Boy. But I've read, because she had also read most of the 3rd book too. And she's like, but I've had 3 books of this, so that's why. And she was like, no, I really didn't like this character in the first. So she got the old one out, she read it, she's like, yeah, I don't like this character. And then she reread it in the rewrite, and she's like, oh my God, I love this character. And then she read the original, she's like, I don't like this character. And she's like, when she talked to me, she was like, nothing different happened. The chapters are the same. How is it at the end of one, I love the character, and at the end of the other, I don't really care about it? And not that she hated the character, but she wasn't attached to the character yet. She gets attached to him later. And I'm like, yeah, that's being a better writer, which is why I wanted to rewrite this. Because now at the end of the very opening chapter of, his name is Arderi, you love this character and cannot wait to find out what happens next. Whereas the original version, you're like, okay, he's a character. Maybe it'll be interesting at some point, but it definitely isn't at this point. And yet in both chapters, he wakes up, he goes downstairs, he eats breakfast, and then he goes out to the fields to farm. That's it. That is all that happens in both chapters. There's no difference, except for in one and the length. One is about 2,400 words. The other is about 4,200 words.
So I will say that there is one thing that you need to be aware of in your character length, and you should probably try and stick under 9,000 words.
Oh, yeah.
Because, and this is actually a technical thing, 9,000 words is roughly an hour's worth of narration. So if you have any intent to go into an audiobook format, the audiobook providers do not like chapters that are longer than an hour in narration. They don't, ACX and so on, they're not fond of it. They want the things broken down into chapters. So
and readers don't want that either.
Yeah. So if you go over 9,000 words, you're probably going to end up with a narration broken up into a part A and a part B, which is not ideal.
Right.
So I would say stick under 9,000 words. Mm-hmm. But other than that, it can be any length you like.
Right. Well, not any length that you like. It's any length that accomplishes its goal.
Yes.
And leaves the reader satisfied at the end of that scene. And I like to say scene instead of chapter because, most of my chapters are one scene long, but some are, you know, sometimes I do scene break and do multiple scenes within one chapter, but each one of those scenes still needs to accomplish what it would have accomplished if it was its own chapter. So those 5 things that I always talk about. And I know we've gotten off track because we were supposed to be talking about peak balance, but really all of this,
I think this dovetails because it's the same thing. At the end of the book, the reader has to feel that each POV was impactful to the story, that each POV mattered to them. And if the POV didn't matter to the readers, why is it in the book?
Going back to, and I can pick on the Stormlight Chronicles from Sanderson because, you know, he sold 10 million copies or whatever. And then he just made 42 million reselling the same book to the same fan base. So, and I, you know, I'm definitely one of those people. But like, just to kind of illustrate this, so you have that one section in the middle of book 1 where you go off to this other guy on this other continent in this other part of the world, and it's interesting, but it has nothing to do with the story that I'm reading. And by the time I get to the end of it, the main story has impacted me greatly. I've really loved The Way of Kings, brilliantly written book. But I don't even, it's like the Tom Bombadil section. I don't even remember that it was there. It made no impact on me from the grand scale. So therefore now it's kind of almost like you've wasted your time in putting that in there because, and I'm sure that he would, and I've never actually talked about this. Maybe I should one day. I don't think I've ever actually told him anything negative the few times that we've been together. That's just my opinion, you know, and I'm sure he would go, okay, well, here's why I did it. And here's why it's great. And here's why, whatever. And I'm sure he has a brilliant answer to it. And maybe I would change my mind if I had new information of why, but as a reader, it didn't work for me. Yeah. And so I write, my decisions as an author are always dictated by what impacts me as a reader. That's why I say I'm my favorite author, because I freaking love what I write, because I write for me. Luckily, I am such a broad fan that I have a large fan base because everyone else feels that I'm writing for them because they're the exact type of reader that I am. And that's really what you try to get with your fan base. What you're looking for are, you need to write it in such a way that captures as many people as you can that enjoy exactly what you're writing. But still, I'm writing for me. And if I don't feel that I'm impacted by a scene, then it's not going in there.
The most important part is every POV needs to impact the reader. And every storyline needs to impact the reader. And if you end up with a POV or a storyline that is not impacting the reader because it doesn't have an equitable share of the story, then leave it on the cutting room floor or add more body to it.
Or make him a secondary character.
Or make it a secondary character. Cut the POV. It's not meant to be a POV character.
And all those are legitimate. The only thing I do want to add at the end, and I don't want to go into it because it literally is the next podcast that we're going to be talking about, but I think it needs to be said here because earlier we were talking about, okay, the introduction chapters. So we like that slice of life. We're going to give you some time to get to know these characters. How do you accomplish that and not lose the readers? Like going to my example of the first Ardari chapter in the original version of Farmers and the new Ardari chapter in the rewritten Farmers and Mercenaries. It's very simple. You must have a defined conflict that the reader goes, ooh, that's interesting. And you must do it really in the first paragraph. Maybe you can get away with the second paragraph, and we'll look at some of these in the next podcast. But that is how you do it. That is the most important way that you can do a chapter where a kid wakes up, goes downstairs, eats breakfast, and goes out to the field to work, and make it an impactful, enjoyable, interesting, exciting chapter that I want to read, and I cannot wait to read what happens to him next. It's that, and that's really the big thing that I learned so much between the Drake that wrote Farmers and Mercenaries in 2000, probably I started in 2005, maybe it was published in 2008, versus the Drake that rewrote Farmers and Mercenaries, over the last couple of years.
And I think that that is a good note to close this podcast on. We will see you soon for another one.
Bye.